It was set up to be the biggest game of the season, but Georgia-Tennessee, if you're a fan, it fell a little flat because Georgia absolutely dominated, never even close. Tennessee entering the game with the best scoring offense in the country, but thanks to a stout Georgia defense and Jalen Carter, the Volunteers only managed a touchdown through 3 quarters. Tennessee entering the game 12th in the nation in passing plays of 20 yards or more, came away with just one in this game. Georgia ultimately winning 27-13. Firmly on top of the SEC and firmly on top of Dennis Dodd's latest power rankings. All right, so we go Georgia, Ohio State, TCU. Last week, 1 through 5 was Ohio State, Tennessee, and then Georgia, followed up by TCU, Michigan. So Georgia back up to number 1, Ohio State dropping to 2. They were able to escape Northwestern with a win, not pretty. TCU up to number 3. They are still undefeated after they beat Texas Tech over the weekend, and Tennessee moving down to number 5. So where does this leave them in the SEC? And what about LSU? Keep an eye on those LSU Tigers. Let's welcome in college football expert Dennis Dodd with his latest power rankings. Check them out on CBSSports.com. All right, Dennis, so you got Georgia at number 1, then Ohio State, TCU. Bless you to Christopher. We have seen close games for Georgia so far this season. Like we saw for Ohio State, Georgia was close with Kent State. They were close with Missouri. Are they starting to separate themselves a little bit, or where do you put Georgia in the pecking order?
Yeah, I think Saturday was a turning point. I was there, and it just seemed like something special happened. Just seeing them in person. That was a 27-13 game, Amanda, that could have been 50-13. They only had a field goal in the second half. But you knew that Tennessee could have played till next Thursday and wasn't going to catch them. It was just a total defensive effort. Stetson Bennett, I think, is kind of on the periphery for the Heisman. I'm not saying he's going to win it, but he was his efficient self. And I just, that game was one of the biggest in school history. We're talking about Georgia, which has been around more than 100 years playing football. The decibels there were equivalent to a 747 taking off from, 100 yards away. That was the sound equal when they started ramping up on that game. But Kirby Smart had a plan for Tennessee. Hendon Hooker was completely taken out of the game. My favorite stat from that game is their entire receiving corps. Remember these receivers? Best in the country, maybe. They averaged 2.7 yards in yards after catch. I don't have the numbers. I'm trying to get them, but I would submit that number is probably about 10 or 15 yards on average coming into that game. They completely stifled Tennessee. And my favorite quote from Kirby Smart from that game is, "We went hunting with a purpose." How about that?
Yeah, that's kind of terrifying. I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that. Look, we're going to get to LSU here in a second, but when it comes to Tennessee, you say still don't rule them out, though, as the second best team in the SEC.
No. Look, they have that one loss on their resume, and if they win out, and you're sitting there at 11-1, and you're compared to a 12-1 TCU Big 12 champ, a Oregon that's 12-1 that lost to Georgia by 49, that's going to be a decision for the committee. Now, they always favor, or at least most of the time, let me say that, most of the time favor conference champions. But this is still a Tennessee team that is very good. On Saturday, Amanda, that was the 6th-ranked team they've played. They've beaten 5 of them, and if they win out, it's going to be hard to keep them out as the second team from the SEC.
A team I want to talk about if they went out is LSU. We saw them beat Alabama. They're in Death Valley. They are now firmly on top of the SEC West, up 7 spots in your power rankings to number 6 here. Look, I'm not sure if they would beat Georgia in the SEC title game, though. But if they were to win out, could we be talking about a playoff team here? And then also your biggest takeaway from that game?
Yeah, I'll answer both questions at once. My biggest takeaway is this is why Brian Kelly went to LSU, that we're sitting here in the second week of November, 7-2 at LSU. You're not talking about only the SEC West. You're talking about possibly winning the SEC. And then at that point, an 11-2 LSU would have to be in the playoff, having beaten Georgia, having beaten Alabama, with the schedule they've got already. This is why he left Notre Dame. Nothing against Notre Dame, but if you lose any 2 games at Notre Dame, you're out of the playoff race. At LSU, you've not only got access to better players, better recruits, but it's a better schedule. And so you saw what happened, and you combine that with the way they coached that game Saturday night. That offensive line for LSU features 2 freshman offensive linemen. In the second half, they pushed Alabama around. So this is a team that's getting better, and I fully expect them to win the SEC West. Beat Georgia? I don't know, but they're pretty good. They're on a roll right now.
Dennis, what do you make of Alabama? What are we to make of Alabama right now?
Yeah, I've seen them, let's see, 3 times this year. And I think the best thing I can say about them is it's not a vintage Alabama team. The best thing they've got going for them is Bryce Young, and he's the defending Heisman Trophy winner, but they don't have a breakaway runner. They don't have a receiver that can blow the top off. Their back end is suspect. I think the front seven is good, but I haven't heard Will Anderson's name in a couple of weeks. Here's a guy that was supposed to be the best defensive player in the country. He wasn't much of a factor Saturday. The game before that, he wasn't much of a factor. And I think Nick is really frustrated. When you combine that with Georgia at this high point, really in its history, or one of the high points in its history, then the questions come up, is this the end of the dynasty of Alabama? We will see. But Kirby Smart's got 25 years on Nick Saban to get those next 6 national championships.
Yeah, Nick Saban now, 71 years old for Nick Saban. I'm sure after the season we'll talk about his future in depth. But let's keep going here. Battle for the Pac-12 title entering the final stretch of the season. Oregon, UCLA, USC, they all come away with this past weekend. They are all now still sitting at 8-1. Utah somewhat still in the mix at 7-2. What do you make of the Pac-12 entering this final stretch?
I've got them 7, 8, and 9. I've got Oregon, USC, and UCLA in that order. The worst case scenario right now for the Pac-12, and they're right in it. They're having their best season in 5 years since the last time they had a team in the CFP. So no disparaging the Pac-12 right now. But the worst case scenario for the Pac-12 right now is if Utah wins the league, because I don't think they'll get in with 2 losses. They played a fine schedule, but I don't think they'll get in as LSU with 2 losses would. The best chance for the Pac-12 to get in is for USC to win out. They've got 1 loss by 1 point to a quality Utah team they led for the entire game. Oregon is the highest ranked team, but I think the committee, if Oregon wins out and goes 12-1, Georgia's going to be there. Are they sitting there going, okay, Oregon's only loss is by 46 points to Georgia. Do we want to see that again? They wouldn't say that, but I think it'd be in the back of their minds, where even then, USC is a bigger brand, maybe a better quarterback, although Bo Nix is balling out. He's doing great right now. He should be in the top 5 for the Heisman. But I think it would be in the Pac-12's best interest for USC to win out.
Let's talk about Notre Dame, Texas, both back in your power rankings at 20-21. Notre Dame beating Clemson. Dennis, you have not thrown it out. I know you have a little stat about Clemson and Oklahoma and Alabama losing, so feel free to give it to us. But also talk about these teams, what's facing them in these last couple of games here, because I know they could potentially both be looking at a New Year's Six game.
Yeah, well, real quick, first time Alabama, Clemson, and who was the third? Oklahoma. Lost on the same day since 2007. So I just made your day, Amanda. I know that. But Texas and Notre Dame are now in a situation where either or both could get a New Year's Six bowl if they win out. They're both 6-3. Notre Dame with the big win, signature win over Clemson. They still have to play USC at the end of the year, but the other games are against BC and Navy. So if they can beat USC, I don't see any way that Notre Dame's kept out of that one of those New Year's Six bowls. As an independent. Liberty has the best chance. I don't think they'd beat them out at 11-1. Texas is really interesting. If they beat TCU this week, they control their own destiny to get to the Big 12 championship game. They've already beaten Kansas State. They host Baylor in the regular season finale. So they would control who finishes in the top 2. And if they do that, then they would be there. And that would be somewhat of Texas turning the corner, Texas being back with 3 wins in the Big 12 championship game, but a big one this week against TCU.
Texas back-ish, hosting undefeated TCU this weekend. They are favored, Dennis, in that game by 7 in Austin. We'll see how that goes, and we'll talk about it over the course of the week leading up to Saturday. Dennis Dodd, check out his power rankings on CBSSports.com, all of them there. Cover 3 podcast, your home for all things college football. Latest episode, recapping what we saw this past weekend. Also, upon further review, they always do that episode on Monday. Have a little bit longer to think about what we just saw and what is coming up in week 11. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.